मामुपेत्य पुनर्जन्म दुःखालयमशाश्वतम् नाप्नुवन्ति महात्मानः संसिद्धिं परमां गताः.
Having attained me, the Mahatmas, great souls, are not born again to the abode of pain which is transient. They have gone to the highest perfection. So here straight away, he's telling us the difference between ordinary mortals like us, ordinary Atmas like us, and Mahatmas. What's the difference? You and I, ordinary mortals, are subject to rebirth. We are born again. Mahatmas have no rebirth. Now, this brings us, before we get into whether there is rebirth or not, let's examine, as we saw yesterday, what is happening within our life. Between birth and death, we are constantly propelled by desires to fresh experiences. We move from one experience to the other, driven by, motivated by desires. Isn't that right? So, it's desire that pushes us from one experience to the other right through our lifetime. And then suddenly what happens? There is death. Death means the body is gone. But the mind, the intellect and vasanas, the desires, are still there. Even physics tells us that matter can neither be created nor destroyed. It is only transferred from one form to the other. So when we speak of rebirth, it is a scientific projection, it's a scientific collation of facts in such a way that everything fits in. Because if you say that death is the end of everything, then the question arises, so what happens to all the aspirations, the goals, the attachments, the thoughts, the desires, the emotions of the person who has gone? It is highly unscientific to believe that it suddenly vanishes into nothing. On the other hand, take a look at birth. People are born with distinct characteristics, specific traits, gunas, and in early childhood, you show your personality. So, it seems as if at birth, suddenly a whole lot of energy comes into being from nothing, as it were. So, all that the masters did, the sages did, was they correlated the sudden loss of energy at death with the sudden appearance of energy at birth and said that that energy, those resources which seem to have gone into nothing at death, reappear again, are reborn again as the birth of another individual. So then it intellectually satisfies you because you understand that there is nothing strange happening. The only thing that happens is the body is shifted, the physical body with which you had a connection right through your life. Now there is a separation from the physical body. Why? And that too they explain. Because the physical body and the environment is no longer conducive for the fulfillment of your desires, your vasanas, so it necessitates a change. And you take on a fresh body and a new set of circumstances which are more conducive for the fulfillment of your desires. So when you look at it like that, when you look at it objectively, when you look at it separated from your attachments and your feelings, then you understand that every death is a promotion because you move to a better set of circumstances, you move to a better physical body and environment that is more conducive for the fulfillment of your personality. So that is why in the Indian culture, it is not taken as a complete disappearance. So there is no great excitement either about birth or death because you understand there is a continuum, there is a continuity. The only thing that happens is wherever you are attached, or to the extent you are attached, you get hit. You get hit by the separation. So that's all that happens. So now what he's saying is that ordinary mortals like us, because at death we still have the fuel of desires and vasanas, we are reborn. The Mahatma is not reborn. What is the difference? The Mahatma does not have that fuel of desires which brings him back into the life of suffering. That's what he says. So, let's take a look at desire. Where does desire come from? Because it is desire which propels us from experience to experience, from birth to birth, from death to rebirth, again and again, over and over again. So desire comes from a sense of emptiness, a sense of unfulfillment, a vacuum that you feel within you. Every one of us is feeling that even right now. When you feel empty, thoughts automatically arise in your mind and they go out into the world to obtain various objects and beings in the belief that when I get these things, the emptiness will go. But it never occurs to us that in spite of fulfilling so many desires, let's say in this year, 2006, from January till now, you may have fulfilled so many desires. Has your emptiness gone? No. Has it even reduced? No. Has it ever occurred to you, why is it that in spite of filling yourself with so many things, that emptiness does not go? It is illogical, unscientific to see something that is empty, not filling up however much objects you put in it. This happens because Vedanta tells us that the emptiness that you feel within yourself is really not there, is imaginary. If the emptiness were real, it could be filled. If you were really experiencing a void, then it makes sense to go out into the world and get things. But when that emptiness is not real, when the emptiness is imaginary, and the fact is that you are not just full, you are completely satisfied, fulfilled, paripurna, then it is impossible to fill it with anything other than knowledge of your fullness. And so it becomes so important to gain knowledge of the fullness. And the Mahatmas are those who have reached that state of full knowledge of their completion, the state of paripurna. And therefore, there are no desires. When there are no desires, there is no rebirth. See, it's interesting that the accent is on rebirth. The accent is not on death. And we'll shortly see why it is so. But now, looking at desires, based on that, they arrived at a formula for happiness. Why do you entertain desires? Because there is this void. But since the void is not for real, how can you achieve happiness? Not by fulfilling desires, but by following this formula. We've seen this over and over again. Those of you who've heard this earlier, do you remember the formula? What is it? Sorry? See, that's why we say there has to be a daily exposure to this knowledge, because it is so volatile. I'm sure many of you have heard it, but you're not able to repeat it because it doesn't stay. So what is the formula for happiness? Happiness equals desires fulfilled divided by desires harbored. Desires fulfilled divided by desires harbored. Now, even if you don't accept it, just go along with it for the time being. If you want to increase your happiness using this formula, what must you do? Either increase the desires fulfilled, increase the numerator, or reduce the denominator. What are we focusing our attention on? Increasing the numerator. And we are rushing out into the world to increase that numerator. We succeed in increasing the numerator. There's so many desires you fulfill. But has your happiness increased? Yes or no? No. Why? Because without our realizing it, as we go through life's experiences, you pick up desires. So your denominator increases. See, remember, wherever you go, whatever you do, you see something that you don't have, you say, oh, nice. Particularly when you see women meet, ladies meet. Suddenly they see a particular bangle or particular chain or particular t-shirt that the other person is wearing. So, oh, nice. When you say nice, you don't understand what's happening inside. What is happening inside? One more desire. Desires harbored increase. And we've reached a state, at least 2 generations back, there was an inbuilt, control to the denominator. And that was, if you couldn't afford a thing, whether you liked it or not, you couldn't have it. So you drank a glass of cold water and gulped the desire. But now, things have changed. Thanks to credit cards, thanks to mortgage, thanks to all the rest of it. So what happens is, you are borrowing from your future happiness. Not only have you finished off the present happiness, but you're borrowing from future happiness. So what are you doing? If you can't afford a thing, financial institutions, banks come to you and say, don't worry, buy now, pay later. You're thinking of getting married and you want a home, don't worry, you can't afford it, buy the house now, pay till your dying moments. Till the age of 65, you're busy paying EMIs. You can't afford a washing machine, don't worry. You can't afford a holiday, don't worry, just go on the holiday, pay later. And you don't understand what you're doing. What you're doing is, we're not against the system, we're only talking about what's happening as far as this formula is concerned. The denominator is increasing at such a pace that you can't keep track of it. And the numerator is where it is. The fact of the matter is, in ancient India, our cultural roots are in just following this formula, which is, if you look at it carefully, you'll find that the numerator really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many desires you fulfilled. What matters is, the crucial link in all this is the denominator. How many desires are you harboring? If somehow you're able to bring this denominator down, your happiness increases. Your happiness increases without anything changing in the externals. Your standard of living remains the same, the kind of car you move in remains the same, the house you live in remains the same, your wife remains the same, everybody remains the same. But your happiness increases. And this is a wonderful state to be in, because then you're independent of the world. You're not dependent on what the world doles out to you. And if you bring down the denominator to 0, what happens? Infinite happiness. Now you all know the formula. That's the first step. But the next step is to grapple this to your soul and try and increase your happiness by dealing with this denominator. If you make it your life's mission to reduce this denominator, and somehow or the other, sometime in your life, I must bring that down to 0. My God, just the commitment to that denominator is enough to change your life completely. And then comes, how do you bring down the denominator, is the whole spiritual practice. So therefore, then he says, then you reach a state of a Mahatma where you're not born again to this world, which is, he says, he defines the world. See, this is what we mean by clarity. He doesn't say the world is full of temptations and fantastic things. He says this world is, number 1, the abode of pain. Number 2, transient. Dukkhalaya. and ashashvatam. This doesn't mean that Krishna has a pessimistic view of life. He's got a realistic assessment of the world. And if you take a look at what's happening to us in the world, it's precisely that dukkhalaya. And it's because of his assessment of the world as dukkhalaya and ashashvatam that it is the rebirth that is a problem. The death is not the problem. See what happens at birth. An infant is born, it can't express itself. It's wholly dependent on the mother, and now even mothers are nowhere in the picture. It is, what do you call them? Maids. So the children of highly educated, elite people are being brought up by illiterate people. Mother is nowhere in the picture. But anyway, brought up by people and the infant is dependent. It can't express itself. And so it goes through a series of illness and tragedy and this, that and the other, and so it struggles to grow. Every single landmark in the child's growth, if you examine carefully, is painful. Just the flipping over on its stomach, how much effort it has to make, and how many times it hurts itself. And then sitting up, crawling, walking, speaking, going to school. Can you imagine how traumatic it is? Suddenly, the first day of school, the child is in the safe environment, secure environment of the home, and suddenly is taken to this strange place where there are so many children and one tyrant of a teacher. At least to the child, it's like that. And then go through every class in school and university and this, that, and the other, and then you go through teenage crisis. And then you go through, now people say midlife crisis, and this crisis after crisis hits you till one fine day you die, and it doesn't end there. It starts all over again. And when you take a look at that, you say, my God, I must do something about cutting this cycle of life and death. It's a perception. You hear it, you read it, you go over it. It doesn't make an impact until one fine day it just hits you. And the day that it hits you is the day that it has really made a difference to you. And then you make a sincere attempt to break free from this cycle of life and death. As Shankaracharya says, he said in the Bhaja Govindam,
Punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, punarapi janani jadhare shayanam. Iha samsare bahudustare, krupaya pare pahi murare.
so, punarapi jananam, again birth, again death,